Hello and welcome to the Raptors Weekly Podcast. I'm Samson Folk, and today joining me, a dear friend, but also only because it's the age-old adage: keep your friends close, and your enemies closer. An enemy of mine, somebody who consistently outshines me in anything that we go head-to-head in. Matt Shantz, who is a colleague of mine at Raptors Republic, a tea connoisseur, a dog dad, and an absolute wife guy. Matt, how are you doing today, man?
Hey, life is good outside of basketball stuff at the moment, so no huge complaints, but talking about the Raptors isn't a thrill right now, but we'll do it.
When I asked you to come on the podcast, were you initially expecting for us to have a joyous game to talk about, or a joyous past couple games, or what did you think the situation would be at that time?
I was anticipating a victory, but at the absolute worst, I was expecting at least an entertaining game to talk about, not just a train wreck. So I actually turned off the game at halftime. It was just not good for my mental health, and I watched the second half this morning just stress-free. So.
And what did that add for you? Did you find you had more clarity looking at the second half, since it was kind of compartmentalized from the first in a way that it often isn't when you watch it all as one thing? Did it provide any extra clarity for you?
Normally, when I start a game, particularly a game of significance, such as a 2-2 tied game 5, there's usually a little bit of anticipation, some energy, some excitement, and that can very easily twist into anxiety and just being a little bit stressed about what's happening. So when I turned it off and came back to it, there was no stress. I knew the result. It was over, and there was nothing that could change. So I could just kind of take it in.
Luckily, I get access to when you watch basketball a lot of the time. I get a little notification, and then I know Matt is watching either a Raptors game or some separate game, and you are a serial morning basketball watcher. Am I missing out by not watching basketball in the morning? Because I typically don't. But you, sir, you watch a lot of basketball in the morning. What am I missing?
Are you a morning person?
Sometimes. If it's for like a game of golf, or like to go hang out with friends or anything like that. If it's something that I enjoy doing, which ostensibly I enjoy watching basketball. Maybe not last night's game, but in general.
Yeah, it's great. You wake up, the house is quiet, you make yourself a nice cup of tea. There's no commercials. Challenges and reviews are sped up. There's no halftime. You can just kind of cruise through games at a leisurely pace. And it's a fantastic way to start the day.
See, this is why you best me at so many different things. It's that you allow yourself this pacing in your life that I think it extends to everything you do. So not only have you've exercised coffee and you've gone to tea, which I think is objectively the thing to do. So you've got me there. You seem to beat me in head-to-head everything we do, and I'm like a pack rat. I'm just absolutely a maniac watching every game as it comes live, and then trying to put all of my analysis into one little bite-sized thing immediately after. Like as soon as the game ends, I'm like, okay, like get the mic, let's go, like run. And you're just strolling through life like, oh hey man, how's it going? You're like the Zen master of Raptors Republic, the Phil Jackson, as it were.
I'll take that. You just get by on your looks and talent, and I'll get by with strategy.
Yeah. Okay. The question I had teed up for you though, Matt, was an interesting one, and I'm curious because I think you might be somebody who had a lot of this at one point in time. But what is the largest sum of Canadian Tire money you've ever had in your life?
Ooh. It wouldn't actually be all that much. It was probably when I was a kid and my parents didn't actually collect it all that much. So it was probably a lot of 10s and 5-cent pieces of paper that they used to have, but no more than maybe $2 or $3.
Okay. Well, that's a little bit underwhelming, but that's fine. What do you think about the premise itself of Canadian Tire money? Because when I was a kid, you know how kids are always scrounging for cash? Like my parents didn't typically I didn't have an allowance or anything like that. So I had to like scrounge for cash around the couch when I wanted to do something, because you can't work as a kid. And It's not like I got a whole bunch of money for birthdays. So like I was set for everything. No, I had to scrounge. I was in the couch cushions. When I would see a Canadian Tire dollar, I'd be like, can I turn this into something tangible? Does this become a chocolate bar down the line? How do I make this work? And my
Nice.
family, not really big on Canadian Tire, but I saw other families who did, and I had this friend who had a bunch of Canadian Tire money because his parents would always give it to him, and I thought he was rich, only to learn now that he had no money, and it probably all went to waste.
All right. Now that we've kind of expanded on this topic a little bit, I do need to change my initial answer. I've definitely had more than $2 of Canadian Tire money. There was a day walking home from school. This was probably in about grade 3. I'm walking with my brother and my brother's friend, and we walk through the park. There's a river or a little creek in the park that's slightly frozen over since it's the fall. And my brother's friend dares me, says he'll give me $2 if I can walk across this thin layer of ice on the creek. And it's like, sure, I'll do that. So I walk across. My foot just goes in at the final step, but I'm fine. And he gave me $2 of Canadian Tire money. That was my big win.
Wow. You have always been a gambler, I see. Somebody who's willing to put his body on the line. And you do often for Raptors Republic, waking up early, grinding out those games for all the analysis. And I can see clearly it started as a young man in. Did you grow up in Winnipeg?
No, I grew up in Waterloo.
Waterloo.
Yep, yep,
Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na.
KW.
Oh,
Jamal
KW.
Murray.
Oh yeah, Kitchener Waterloo. And
Yep.
well, can you tell me what shared experience do you think you have with Jamal Murray then? What is a staple of Waterloo and Kitchener that 100% you and Jamal Murray both experienced that as children or something like that?
Yeah, my guess growing up is that he went to Victoria Park, probably King Street in Kitchener, maybe Uptown Waterloo. So there's a few staple areas that you go to, and maybe taking in some Oktoberfest as well.
Wow. Interesting stuff. I've already learned so much and this podcast is only only 8 minutes young. But Matt, let's transition. I've done the reaction podcast as you know, as I am wont to do, but I'm ready to run through last night's game with you at least briefly before we talk about some more maybe macro things as far as this series goes. What were the things you liked from the game last night? Because I had trouble finding anything. Did you
Ooh,
glean anything meaningful from the game in your morning watch?
liked. That's maybe it's that's getting too strong. Um, he definitely wasn't flawless last night. There was some points where he really fumbled the ball, but really the standout to me, particularly in the first half when everything was going wrong, was OG. He was just he scored 7 of their first 10 points. I think was the only person who could really get anything going. His rebounding this playoffs continues to really impress me. He's taken a step in that regard, and how he attacks the offensive boards, and even just some of the powerful defensive rebounds that he's pulling down. So for me, OG was kind of the standout, but I tend to watch him the most. So maybe that's just my bias coming through.
No, I think that's probably accurate. We're picking up the same things from the game. I think I also you brought up OG's rebounding. It hasn't been talked about. I've written about it sparingly in the quick reaction, but it gets a mention and on the podcast. But typically, it hasn't received a lot of attention. That's been very very impressive, as you said. Powerful defensive rebounds. He's closing out possessions, and every once in a while, we'll sky in for this possession saving offensive rebound that is very important. And in games that have been this close, well, typically, 3 of the games have been close, 2 of them not so much. But in games that are close, those extra possessions, they're super big time. And I've really enjoyed OG's performance. As far as this series, do you think that's the biggest step? Let's say we don't know what the outcome is going to be. Game 6 and Game 7 lie ahead, provided that there is a Game 7. And let's say just going into next year, you have to end things now. What is your biggest takeaway from this series? Is it OG? Is it that Kyle still has it? Or is it somebody faltering? Are you taking away things from this series more in a positive light or more in a negative light? Like you understand your limitations now?
I would take it. I'm generally more of a positive person, and that's why I had turned the game off last night, because I wasn't feeling positive anymore. Yeah, the biggest takeaways are the ones that you mentioned. OG, I think that he's really blossoming into himself. Even a lot of the little misses that he has around the basket, he still needs to improve in his finishing. But those times that he misses, it's pretty stark and impressive how often he collects his own rebound, his own misses. And so he's really taken a big step in my mind. And then the other one is that Kyle can still be a boss. He might not be able to, perhaps last night he was fatigued. He's had a big workload at his age. But when needed and on the right team, he can really carry you. And so those are my two big takeaways. And I think the Pascal struggles are a little bit overblown. He's playing a really good defensive team with a lot of long, talented wings that are good defenders in themselves, and pests like Marcus Smart, who's really good at what he does. I reluctantly say. Yeah, so I think that the big takeaways are OG and Kyle.
I think, yeah, once again, accurate. And what you said about Kyle as far as being fatigued, that's kind of what I thought as well, because otherwise the Raptors' game plan from last night, and I'm sure you noticed, made no sense. My stipulation, the thing that bothered me was that the Raptors in games 2, 3, and 4 had a very clear winning strategy, even though they didn't win in game 2, things fell apart late, but they had a winning strategy where in their read and react offense, typically Kyle Lowry was the reader and the reactor, and his brain and decision making fueled their offense to the point where they kind of loosened up the back end of the Celtics so that Pascal Siakam can find room in the paint. Fred VanVleet can work off ball. But they reversed that back to that game 1 type of offense where we saw carryover from the Nets series where it's Fred as lead guard. Is there any explanation for why this might have happened outside of Kyle was tired and somebody else had to, take the offense for a night? Because that seems far too simplistic. Did you glean anything else from that?
I'm not particularly. The only rationality that I can come up with otherwise is Nurse anticipating Boston trying to take Lowry out. And so if you are anticipating certain adjustments from the other team, maybe you preemptively bring something in, such as have Fred be more on ball and Lowry more as the reaction off ball. But that's kind of a guess on my part, and I didn't see anything concrete to back that up.
Okay, so let's talk about Fred then. Fred, fantastic year. Very, very impressive in the Nets series and has had really dominant stretches. Well, not dominant, just incredibly valuable and efficient stretches as an off-ball guy in this series. Like you see him climb up to 25 points in one game and he's hitting like 6 or 7 threes. It's a big deal. He's letting it go from downtown and his shooting is such a boon for this offense. We're also looking at a guy who is coming up on, a contract. He's clearly wanting to be profiled as a lead guard. And is it fair to look at this series and say, I don't think Fred is there because he keeps getting trapped in the middle of the Boston Celtics defense, their length, their mobility. They can funnel him in there, and then they can deny him the passing lanes and the seams that he's used to. He typically is great at creating shots to the corners. That has not been there at all in this series. It's a big reason why the Raptors had 5 points in the first 8 minutes of the game last night. And so is it fair for me to say this definitively does, it's like we're seeing the ceiling of Fred's lead guard capabilities. And that doesn't mean he doesn't deserve a lot of money this offseason because the player that he is very valuable. But for a long time, I've been a Fred VanVleet pessimist, I think, relative to a lot of other Raptors writers. And I think two guard. I think of Fred as a two guard. Do you think we're getting an answer to that question? Or do you think I'm being too harsh and this is just a tough matchup?
No, it's if you're being too harsh by saying he deserves a lot of money and can be a key starter on a championship roster, just maybe not as a primary initiator, that's a pretty like low level for considering it being harsh. I would side with you. I do think that having him as a primary ball handler, you do kind of cap what your roster is capable of. That would still be likely a 50-win team. It could be a second round team, and even in the right scenario, maybe you're making it to a conference final. But with dealing with a team of rangy wings, and I keep using that term for Boston because it just describes them so well. It does put a cap on what he's capable of and how he can create for himself and create for others. Ideally, he is best relocating off the ball. And so playing alongside of somebody like Lowry, who is just a genius when it comes to basketball, or if the Raptors were a team with a primary initiator as a wing creator, he would be elite in his role. But if you're counting on him to run the show, there's a cap.
Okay, so I wrote something about this morning. It just recently came out, so I'm not expecting a bunch of people to be up to date on it. But when you look at this, and this is something I wrote about, so I'll have a response. When you look at what would it be? The deployment and utilization of those three players, Lowry, Siakam, and Fred VanVleet. There's a clear pattern of how they've been used, and there's a clear idea, I think, of how typically the analytically minded fans think they should be used. And I think that it means that we're looking more towards Pascal transitioning to more of a wing role, at least stylistically on offense, which allows Fred to work off ball. I mean, their two-man game has had nice spurts in this series. They've been short, but they've been nice. And you want Kyle operating as the de facto guy. But it seems like we've seen that when Kyle loses possessions, they go to Fred, not to Pascal. And it just seems like when Pascal loses possessions, they go to Fred, not to Kyle. And that seems like a problem. What do you think about that? How they're divvying up those possessions, and what does the ideal version of that look like to you?
The ideal version, if Siakam can be a little bit more consistent, is that they would go through Pascal. But right now, with the way he's being, with the way his shot is struggling, he can't attack in the same way from the perimeter, and with the way they're fronting him in the post, he can't exactly really get, and doubling him a lot of cases. He's not getting the same looks around the rim. And so I think that it's a matter of convenience of sorts, that it's going more so to Fred. Yeah, I'm kind of left at a loss other than that. I would like to see Pascal used a little bit more, and Fred more as the screener, and just as Siakam and Lowry are often used, but we haven't seen that a lot.
Okay, so this morning you go to watch, you turn on the second half. You immediately see Pascal Siakam get 2 ball screens with Marc Gasol. I'm pretty sure they scored on both. And then afterwards, you get Kyle Lowry commenting, specifically saying, we need to get Pascal Siakam more ball screens. Does that surprise you? Does that encourage you? Because the conventional wisdom with the writers of, Toronto, who I think that's who we talk most of our basketball with, probably you and I as our colleagues and people from other places. But the conventional wisdom typically has been, oh yeah, Toronto will start putting Pascal in the screen and roll either as a screener or as a ball handler, because that is an avenue to offense that they weren't taking very often in the regular season. So is it weird to hear them address it in the media before seeing it enacted on the floor? Because you'd think the conventional wisdom in the room would have been that as well. And you'd think you'd hear about it after it's been done. You know what I mean? It's weird to hear it talked about from Kyle Lowry before it's enacted on the floor. What do you think about that?
I don't think that's too weird. We see it from teams off and on, in that they address things that they're working on or that they want to see more of, or maybe there was one play that triggered that for Lowry, like you mentioned at the start of the second half, that they really want to push that dynamic. And so I don't think it's too strange to see something addressed publicly in the media. before seeing it on the court. And maybe that's Kyle's way of putting a little bit of pressure on Siakam of, we need to do this, but that means that you need to do your role. You need to take advantage of those screens when they're available. And so to me, I take that as a motivational strategy and maybe less as a shocking statement.
Well, sorry, it's kind of leaning towards what you said, a motivational strategy. What I mean by that, rather than a shocking statement, is I find it a little bit strange that these conversations in-house, like they could be happening in-house, but that the manifestation of them, if they are happening, haven't been happening on the court. You know what I mean? Like, I understand I'm being a little bit sticky on this, but I'm trying to make the point that it's strange that this seems like such a slam dunk of an avenue to offense and has been in the regular season, that it seems insane that they would not immediately kind of try to do that more often. It's strange that this thing, because it's not like this bombshell of an idea, is even being talked about like that could be something they introduce. Like the Raptors are forward thinking, and Nick Nurse typically is a guy who enacts things before the rest of the league. And even the league has other coaches have copied some of what he's done this time. And putting one of your best players in the pick and roll, it seems like the Raptors are super late to that. And that's the part that shocks me. Maybe less so that they talked about it, but just why they're so resistant to doing that. I know I'm being kind of sticky about this.
And I think I have a better idea now of what you're talking about. And during the regular season, the way it manifested was that we saw that action a lot in crunch time, but we rarely saw it through 3.5 quarters. Is that they used it in specific settings. It's like, well, if you have this reliable weapon that you're trying to develop, why not use it in more scenarios so that you potentially avoid some crunch time opportunities? Whereas now in the playoffs, you're right. We're still not seeing it as much as one would expect.
Yeah. So let's switch to a guy or maybe two guys that have received a huge amount of possessions. The Celtics have given them the ball, and the Raptors have had to try and adjust accordingly. And so if the Raptors play a really great brand of defense, they can get the ball out of their hands. But the Celtics are putting it there to begin with. Kemba Walker, Jason Tatum, a lot of screen and roll action. And they're okay with that kind of being flattened out if the Raptors are going to play it that way, and they're okay going one-on-one. What have you thought about their performances individually? Because I know Kemba, for the most part, has been as dangerous as I assumed. But Tatum has been more dangerous than I assumed, almost exclusively because of his passing chops, which even it would have been hard to predict this. Like, Tatum is a fantastic player. He's very good. His pedigree is really good as well. He has every tool in the box. But the passes he's making statistically is at a way, way higher rate than what we saw in the regular season. What have you thought of that power duo coming out of Boston?
Yeah, Tatum has just amazed me with his passing. You're right, is that I knew that he was a well-rounded player. He was a dangerous scorer, whether in pull-up, whether from deep, or driving to the rim. He's just a 4-level scorer that you just need to account for at all times. But some of the skip passes that he's making to the weak side, or on the drives, how he's finding cutters or somebody sneaking baseline, just incredible, and he is a joy to watch, and that hurts me to say as a Celtics hater, but man, is he fun. And Kemba is Kemba. It goes back to his days at UConn. He is just so dangerous. He is a lightning in a bottle that you just can barely contain at his best, or even at his worst. He's trouble. So those two have just been everything that Boston needs.
Okay, so let's talk about how they've decided to defend them. We saw initially Kyle Lowry defending Jason Tatum, chasing him off ball, really getting into his lower half when he was trying to post up and manipulate that size disparity. Then we get a couple games where OG is the primary, and they try, and if they can, they switch a lot of the screening actions. The Raptors do. If they recognize the screen and roll is coming up, they'll switch at the bottom So Gasol will stay low, Pascal might come up, or OG might come up if Pascal's a primary, and they really flatten out, and they make sure that if Tatum's going to score, he's going to beat one of Pascal or OG in one-on-one. Why do you think it is that we haven't seen a consistent defensive look from OG Anunoby on Jason Tatum? Do you think it is that the Raptors are just trying to avoid, hey, if we put it for too long, Jason Tatum will figure it out eventually. He'll get used to OG's quirks and rhythms, and he's a great offensive player. He'll figure it out. And they always want to keep switching it. Or do you think that they're maybe pursuing something they need not? Because in some playoff series, you just stick the great defender on the great scorer, and you see what happens. Against Dort on James Harden, for example.
Yeah, and I think in that matchup for Dort on Harden is, the Thunder literally don't have any other positive options. He is the one physical character that can match up with somebody like Harden and is easily their best defender. Whereas the Raptors are kind of blessed that they have defenders across the board that bring different skill sets. So I do think that it's to limit Tatum's opportunities to just strategize against one option. So giving him different looks to focus on. In Game 6, I anticipate that it will be OG, and that we go back to that strategy that kind of got mixed up a little bit in Game 5, because with life on the line, you need to go with your best.
Okay, and so for Kemba, we're looking at Game 6. The Raptors have mixed blitzing with Gasol. Really, when they brought three guys high to blitz it, and they were running zone or something like that, they would blitz with Serge. But if it was a two-man, they didn't really ever try to blitz with Serge because he'd get beat around the edge. But Gasol, they'd blitz every once in a while. But typically, I think the drop defense with Gasol really negotiating that in-between space really well was their best option. How do you think they defend the Kemba actions going into Game 6? Because, as you said, even at his worst, and we saw in Game 2, he killed the Raptors late after bricking the whole game. Even at his worst, he's lightning in a bottle. He's dangerous as hell. How do you think they handle that matchup going forward?
I feel like we keep agreeing with each other, which might not be the most entertaining listen, but I do think that they drop. Him driving to the rim is far more dangerous than I think him trying to pull up. And yes, he gets into these grooves where pulling up, he will just decimate teams and hit everything. But it's still a higher variance shot than Kemba going to the rim downhill with the big already passed. So Gasol or Ibaka kind of dropping a little bit and being chased around, or ideally not cutting under. But yeah, well, you kind of hope and pray sometimes with these elite offensive players that they just miss a couple shots.
Okay, let's open up an avenue to controversy then. What is your hottest take about this series? And let's see if we can disagree about something right in the middle here.
Oh, hottest take. Where do I go with this? I'm not much of a hot take person. So you're putting me on the spot.
Hot tea person, more like.
Hot tea. I'm surprised we haven't seen more Chris Boucher. That's going to be my big thing. Is Ibaka has rained fire a little bit from deep in a couple games, and I think Gasol's performance has been underrated if we're going by plus minus, and how he's helped slow down the Celtics in stages. But I'm surprised that we haven't seen more Chris Boucher in order to match some energy, as the Raptors have been a little bit sluggish at times.
Yeah, and so I think we do disagree. I think Chris Boucher only fits in the game if Pascal Siakam is going, if Kyle Lowry is going, if Fred VanVleet is going. He only fits in if he's able to complement a team, because the Raptors, as I view it, have been scraping and clawing their way through these games because they have no easy offense coming to them. And even if Kyle Lowry makes it look easy, at times, we can clearly see the amount of energy he expends is massive, and there is a real toll to his creation. And Boucher, I don't think is like a plug-and-play player like that. I think that he has very specific matchups that he can make work, And so when I look at this series and I think the Raptors, basically, I agree with you in that Gasol has been supremely underrated in this series. The Raptors don't win a single game without him. If the center matchup was Ibaka and Boucher versus Tice and Williams the third, and then maybe Cantor if Brad Stevens decides he wants to lose a game, I guess. If it was that lineup, I think the Raptors are already swept because I think the difference between Serge Ibaka's defense in the pick and roll and and Marc Gasol's is the contrast is stark, and it's much better with Gasol. And I think the Raptors, you can't just give Boucher the ball and suddenly you have energy and offense. The game has to be progressing in a certain type of way. And Chris Boucher, while rangy on defense, is also going to gamble. His footwork isn't super impressive. And I think Kemba Walker, if he's getting more minutes, like matched up with one of Kemba or Jason Tatum, I think is going to get burned by Kemba off the dribble or bodied back to the stanchion or under the basket by Tatum coming downhill. So I don't think there's room for him in this series, at least not yet. But I know that puts me in the minority. I see a lot of people asking for it.
Yeah, I'm not expecting him to play a crucial role, and I definitely see what you're saying, that he is a complementary piece and not somebody that can make a difference on his own. But in regards to, there's been stretches without Kemba where matching him up against Robert Williams would have been an interesting look, as somebody who can in theory do a little bit of a drop, at least similarly to the level that Ibaka can produce, and yet still has a little bit more explosion in order to challenge those shuttle passes up to Williams.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Is that there is a bit of synergy in how they exist, especially since Williams was beating Ibaka to the punch definitively. But here's the thing: Ibaka might not be able to play. So your hot take, it's serendipitous, really, because we have to discuss Game 6. Ibaka might not be there. He might not play. Do you think Boucher is the guy? Do you think they go Siakam at the 5 and it'll be a Game 6 elimination? So we see guys going towards 44, 45 minutes. How do you think that shakes out going to Game 6? Do you think we see, because let's pretend Ibaka's not coming. We have to, just to make this conversation work, let's pretend. How do you think they make that center rotation work? Are you asking way more of Pascal Siakam and finding more minutes for Matt Thomas? Or are you sliding down and bringing Boucher in?
I would guess that Boucher gets the first opportunity, and probably matching up with Time Lord as he comes off the bench. But if anything isn't going well, then you do go small, and more is relied on Siakam, and bring in somebody like Matt Thomas to try and open up things from deep. But Matt Thomas hasn't really done anything yet this series, even in the few stretches that he's had. I don't even know how many shots he's had the opportunity to take. So my guess is Boucher gets first crack and Thomas is the secondary option, but we're going to see 44 plus minutes from the main 5.
Yeah, agreed. That's the thing too, is like Matt Thomas had 10 points last game, but that doesn't matter. It literally could not matter. Terrence Davis played 12 minutes. Boucher played 11. Rondé 7 minutes. Stanley Johnson 4 minutes. None of it mattered. Could not have mattered any less because the Raptors punted that game so early. And immediately we're like, oh, I guess we're not winning this game. Sorry. And then for some, I can't understand it, reason, Serge Ibaka was playing in the fourth quarter until he got injured when they were down almost 30. It's super puzzling. Just as far as Nick Nurse, let's do the Nick Nurse talk. Have you been surprised at all in this series with decision making? Because against the Warriors, I think if we go back through the playoff series, the Warriors, that was pretty flawless. It felt like his utilization of his players was top tier. Felt like the Raptors really were humming. Mm-hmm. And even though Kawhi Leonard wasn't at his second and third round level, the Raptors as a team looked pretty great. Against Milwaukee, there was a decent amount of time that we're all clamoring for, hey, put Kawhi on Giannis. And that adjustment came late too. And as far as the Philly series, The Gasol strictly against Embiid, that came late as well. And it seems like those were the decisions that kind of opened up the floodgates for the Raptors, and they all came late. Have you been surprised at Nurse's maybe lack of malleable material, that his makeup just being less changeable than maybe we maybe expected him to be? Because he has the box and one hoodie. He coached in England, he played in England, he's been all around the world. He'll do anything, but it hasn't been that radical in these playoffs so far. Has that surprised you at all?
Well, I think he's also set a different bar as to what we expect for radical. We now consider throwing out a box and one in the NBA Finals as the new bar of radical, because it hadn't been done since high school basketball. But we're still seeing him test and try different things to variants of success. So we've seen some 2-3 zones. We've seen some triangle and 2. We've seen, I don't think we've seen box and 1 in this series, but the Celtics are just have different weapons for that. So we've seen a mix of zone and man and different assignments. So I think that he is trying things. It just might be not as radical as we've come to anticipate.
Actually, no, I think that's a very good response, is that he's the bar for radical, as you said, is different now. Because if there was a team that was in the Eastern Conference semifinals last year and they were mixing in as much zone and as many, because usually teams have like one zone look and they throw it in for like 7% of defensive possessions, or at least that's how it used to be. It'd come in after a timeout, it'd come in for like 4 possessions at the start of a quarter to jumpstart something. But this constant mix and match of different zone looks throughout the game fluidly, I think, yeah, that's true. Maybe it's this different idea of radical when he's already there. And I was more thinking of not what we're seeing on the floor, but as far as the adjustments of what's being put on the floor, as far as how he's doing that. But with the guys he's playing, that short rotation, I do agree. Defensively, very tons of ingenuity. Offensively, not so much. But I think it's cool that there's a defensive leader out there in Kyle Lowry and Marc Gasol, who kind of shepherd the team into all these different looks, and they play them well. So yeah, I think that's actually probably the best response, is we're looking at a different idea of radical, because if this were happening in the past, I think rightfully so, everybody would be freaking out about it. Matt?
Yeah, like if Bud came in to the playoffs this year and just started Giannis playing 40 plus minutes, that would be radical for Bud, whereas Nurse is just a different level in regards to what we expect.
So the tweet that Anthony Doyle made, that Matt Devlin is said on air, where Nick Nurse is who some people think Brad Stevens is. He's that coach. If we could, are we changing that joke to Nick Nurse is who some people think Mike Budenholzer is? Because Brad Stevens has actually been pretty good in this series. What do you think about that?
I'm going to continue making the Brad Stevens jokes just because he's so easy. But I'll also mock Bud. I think that Bud is they each bring strengths and weaknesses to a team and are right for the specific scenarios. But none of them are perfect, and I still would take Nurse over the lot.
Me too. I definitely would. Okay, Matt. Game 6, it's prediction time, brother. We gotta talk about it. What are some of the things, just the cliff notes you expect to see in the game, and who do you think wins it?
Lowry kicks things off and gets going like he did in games 3 and 4 and really sets the tone. We see Siakam hopefully get into the open floor a little bit more and take advantage of mismatches in the post. And I think that the Raptors squeak out a 5-point win with the heart of a champion. So that's my hope, and we'll see if that actually happens. But I don't think that they're going to go out easy.
I don't think so either. Even though this was, Game 5 was an absolute punt The Raptors, after that start, had no chance. I mean, they're down 27 at halftime. That I don't think that means that they have this kind of what some people perceived the Milwaukee Bucks to have, this kind of fold the tent idea, and the Bucks, as it turns out, didn't have that either. But the Raptors, they're going to be up against it, and especially if Ibaka can't play, I'm really excited to see what happens, and more excited if they are able to win, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And a game seven would be threaten my heart and my life. But I would love to see it. This is a series that we've been waiting a long time for, and Boston has been really, really impressive, and Toronto has had stretches where they've managed to counter. So I I hope for the best in Game Six, and hopefully Ibaka can make a showing as well.
Okay, and so let's talk about the more meta stuff. So basketball is a game. There's a league for it that creates a an economy inside of it, and you and I exist in that economy as writers. And now we're going to talk about not the game, but what the writers thought of the game. Most people on ESPN predicted the Raptors to win this. I'm sure everybody on Raptors Republic predicted the Raptors to win this. Where was the miscalculation, or what hasn't translated that has made this series so difficult for the Raptors? Did we miss something, or is just something not there?
Um, the place that I've really seen Boston shut down what the Raptors are trying to do is their transition defense has been the best I've seen in how they track players back, and how they always get one or two men back first. So that's what I think I missed, is I didn't anticipate them shutting down the Raptors transition scoring to this degree. But I also went into it thinking, and even just reading all those different predictions, I think most people had it going 6 or 7. And when they say 7, it's a toss up. They don't actually feel all that strongly one way or another, and one team just has one or two better shots. So yeah, I don't think that anything in particularly was missed, but Boston has played their game plan to perfection.
Now's the point where I tell you I got away without giving a prediction. I said I don't do predictions, I do art, and so I didn't put one in the round table, luckily.
Yeah,
Because
you and Kelsey.
yeah, cowards, the both of us. But I'll say the other thing that I think everybody missed out too was something that you and I touched on, was Tatum's passing. The Raptors have one of the most impressive blitz defenses of, I would say, the last 20 years. And we're looking at a team that specializes in, if they want to shut down a star, they can really get after them. And Tatum being closer to Doncic's level of passing than Kawhi's level of passing in this series has been a hell of a thing to happen. Like the Raptors, when they blitzed Kawhi, it freaked him the hell out earlier in the season. He took 11 shots, he made 2 of them. He didn't pass the ball particularly well. When the Raptors tried to run that same defense against the Mavericks, Luka Doncic predicted like every single rotation, tore them to pieces with hockey assists, and just predicting what they were going to do and beating them to the punch. And they got crushed. That was impressive as hell. And to see Tatum, like, just for example, when he came downhill and you see Tice start to drop, and Tatum collects it and is already stepping towards Tice like he's going to give him the chest pass. As soon as he sees the guy go to tag the roll man, the ball is sent to the opposite corner where the tag guy was coming from. So it's the moment that they surrender their momentum is the moment that Tatum makes that pass. That read, while the guys like OG Anunoby is hounding him from the back and also being able to square up for a jump shot at the same time, is beyond impressive. Tatum has shown me an extreme level of superstardom in this series. It's blown
Yeah.
my mind, to be quite
there,
honest.
there's a calmness to the way that he's playing right now that nothing is really shaking him. Everything seems to be in slow motion, and that passing has we've always talked about his scoring and knowing that that's something that he can do, and he's been a really really high level defender in the NBA as well. But I haven't seen him pass like this before, and granted, I haven't seen every Celtics game. I've probably watched 25 of them in total this year. But yeah, it's just incredible the way that he's picking them apart.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, Matt, before we get out of here, is there anything else happening in the NBA that you find particularly interesting that you'd like to say into a microphone?
Ooh. Uh, as far as the playoffs right now, the Bucks' inability or unwillingness to extend their main rotation is still shocking to me, even though we've seen it time and time again. And the way that the Heat are able to attack them, I coming into this series, I did pick Heat in 6 just because the Bucks haven't been themselves and the Heat were really rolling, but I didn't anticipate it being this easy for them. But with that said, I think whoever comes out of Toronto, Boston is going to the NBA Finals, because I really don't expect the Heat to have that same advantage over either Toronto or Boston.
Okay, I agree with the Boston-Toronto Finals thing, but you chose Heat in 6. That impresses me because I thought the Heat had no business winning this series, and I don't know if I was overrating the Bucks to any degree, but I definitely underrated the Heat a little bit. Like I love Jimmy Butler, I love Bam, but I maybe and I revere Goran Dragic's game. I think he's fantastic. I think I underrated Hero a little bit. I think I underrated Robinson a little bit, and maybe to some degree Iggy. But I thought the Heat had no business. So if you could give me the cliff notes of what you think the Heat do, and I'll see if I learn anything, because you seemingly are going to accurately predict a 5 seed beating a 1 seed. So I'd like to hear what you think.
I gave them a huge coaching advantage. I think Spo is just incredible at what he does, and would definitely be able to strategize better than Bud. And so that was where it started. But two, the Bucks and their whole strategy is to wall off the paint and to kind of prevent people from attacking. And the Heat have some flamethrowers from deep. So I figured that their challenges in covering Duncan Robinson running around screens would really be a mismatch for them and would cause them to fail in other ways. And despite me not liking him, Jimmy Butler is a real a-hole and a problem. And so I figured that between him and Bam, they would make life challenging on Giannis and challenging on Middleton. And frankly, I don't, despite everything that they did this season, I don't trust the Bucks supporting cast all that much. Bledsoe fails in the playoffs time and time again. Lopez's three-point shooting regressed significantly and hasn't been the same weapon that it was last regular season. And so, yes, they dominated in the regular season, but they have to go up against a pretty good team in the Heat, strategizing for them for 4 to 7 games in a row, and only them.
That seems about right. I had to dig deeper into it from my initial prediction of like, oh, the Bucks will handle the Heat. It'll be simple. After the Heat won the first 2 games, and I decided to write about that matchup for Minute Basketball, I was like, man, this really did not bear out in the way that I expected. And once again, Matt, it seems at the end of the podcast, we've come to a version of life where you best me at something in the prediction game. You've done it again. How do you feel?
It feels mighty good to defeat you in any way. But what I've learned over time is that if you predict an upset and it comes right, that will be remembered. If you predict an upset and it goes wrong for you, well, nobody really cares because you went out on a limb. So I think that I just kind of went with that mentality to sway me over the top for the Heat, and but I still don't give them much of a chance against either the Celtics or the Raptors.
You keep playing it fast and loose with predictions like that. ESPN is going to call you with a job on TV. I tell you that much. Max Kellerman, who do you want if Mars has the laser beam pointed at Earth? Steph Curry or Andre Iguodala? I'm taking Iguodala. You got to let it fly, man.
See, I still I have limits on where I'm willing to make bold predictions. As I said, I'm not much of a hot take, but if I'm torn between two things, I might just lean the more unexpected. But there's some obvious things like Curry being the best shooter in the world that you just need to rely on.
Oh, so you wouldn't take Iguodala? Disappointing.
Never. I wouldn't even have traded for him this season.
No, I'm not a big fan of Iguodala's game. Not at this point. I think he had great years, and also him as a shooter. Are you kidding me? Are you insane? We have OG Anunoby. Why would we ever need Andre Iguodala? But anyway, Matt, we've come to the end of this little wonderful chat that we've had. Have you been drinking a tea erstwhile?
No, I've already had 2 or 3 cups of tea today, and so I'm just drinking in some water at the moment.
What particular flavor was the tea?
Lately, I've been just going with a standard Earl Grey, and then mixing in another orange pico as well as a nice simple beverage. I ran out of rooibos recently and need to pick up some more of that. That's going to be a nice evening tea.
Is your tea drinking at all? Is there a superstition in tea drinking and how the Raptors do? Is there a collinearity there?
None whatsoever. No. I'll sometimes make myself a cup of tea at halftime to just kind of settle and relax. But for the most part, my tea drinking is a morning activity, and then occasionally before bed.
Very nice. Once again, strolling through life leisurely at your own pace. Matt Shantz, thank you very much for coming on. The floor is yours, sir. Tell the people what they need to know, what they should be reading, listening, or, you can direct them to do whatever you want. I'm sure they're at your mercy.
Yeah, as always, read Raptors Republic. That's where you can find my stuff when I actually put something out. It's been a while. Really, I encourage people to sign up for Sam and Lewis's mailbag, Minute Basketball. That's a quality read. And then just we're a stacked team of writers at Raptors Republic, and I'm fortunate to even be mentioned in the same breath. So check out what people are doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt.
My pleasure.
All right, listener, you don't have to support me if you don't want to. Listening to this podcast is already tons, but as Matt said, if you want to stay in tune with the NBA-wide stuff, Louis Zatzman and I do a newsletter called Minute Basketball, and we think it's pretty great. And also, just as a heads up, we are commissioning some specific and awesome as hell artwork that somebody will be able to get at some point. So just stay tuned for that. And if you want to get ahead of it, go subscribe to Minute Basketball right now. But anyway, Matt, thank you very much for coming on. Listener, thank you very much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure, Matt. And listener, enjoy your day. But whether you're getting into this in the morning or at night, have a blessed day and goodbye.